Well, I just got back from the gun store, just took receipt of this. I promised some friends on some of the forums that I would try to do a really good review on this. Hickok 45 did one recently. I'm going to try to do maybe a little more technical review if I can. This is how it comes. It's kind of an unboxing too, I guess. Just because I was very careful in the gun shop not to even work the action. We just looked it over very briefly, mostly just to get the serial number. Very reminiscent of U.S. firearms in the packaging and the logoing and all that. So there'd be some sort of connection there. It's packaged very well. Some other little accessories in the box. I guess I'll talk about them later. I thought they were kind of funny, but if you're tuning into this review, you came mostly to see about the firearm. Standard Manufacturing is a subsidiary of Connecticut Shotgun, which is in New Britain, Connecticut, and they announced some years ago that they were going to be bringing out a single action revolver, a very high quality single action revolver, and it's been years in the making. They finally did announce a couple months ago that they were in production, and I ordered one the next day. It's taken a while to get here. Granted, when you just start up production on a new thing, it takes a little while. So here it is, and this is it's not the earliest one. Some of the guys pre-ordered theirs and got them. One guy I think got serial number 5 that pre-ordered his. This is serial number 54. So still kind of early gun. I actually would have thought they'd be a little further along by now. So 54, kind of neat. 54 backward is 45. That's also kind of neat, although it would have been kind of cool to get serial number 45. This is in 45 Colt. I guess before I do anything else, just going to look it over for just overall fit and finish. The color case hardening is attractive, and that is real bone color case. I prefer a lot of the colors on the some of the Colts from the 50s and 60s. I really like a lot of see the pinks right here. I like that they usually had large swaths of pinks and stuff in them. A lot of people don't, though. This looks closer to what a lot of people get from Turnbull, which is what most people seem to prefer. One thing that's been talked about quite a bit on the forums is the fit of the grips and the machining of the underneath of the trigger guard, and just the way they machine this to where it kind of cuts in slightly instead of being on the same plane as the rest of the trigger guard. It's different. Very nice trigger guard bevels. I like that. The grips are fancy walnut, and they are rather fancy. Got a little burl there. All right, fit of the grips. Seen some examples, some pictures from some guys that had some of the early samples, some of the one-piece fitted grips, and the guy wasn't happy with it. That's pretty darn good fit in my opinion. They're advertised to have a really good, by their account, by their claim, a really good fit on the grips, and this is a good grip fit. Some people complained that they were too proud in a lot of their pictures. The grips were too proud on the side near the frame. They've left it ever so slightly proud. I don't mind them being proud there. If you look at any of the rubber grips, they were always proud there. But I almost think they have taken some of these criticisms under advisement. They don't stick out as far as some of the other examples that I've seen some of the early photographs. So if that's what they've done, kudos to them for listening. It seems to be what most people that I heard that critiqued them when they first came out. One thing they said they were going to do on at least the first run, and they have done with this, is they've used what they call qualified screws. And of course, they have taken the time. It's kind of funny. Even the screw here and the grip screw, they've taken time. They've lined those up, which is funny. But qualified screws are, they all go one direction. So you've had to cut the screw threads in the frame and the screw itself so that when you tighten it down, all the slots are going in one direction. It's neat. It's a kind of an extra measure of quality. They took the time during final assembly to even line up the grip screw, although I think that would be hard to maintain a qualified grip screw since they're wood and there's going to be some compression, but at least they did line it up the same way. And underneath, same thing. All the screw heads pointed in the same direction. Screw head on the ejector rod assembly also. I don't know if you can tell in this light, they have a different bluing. Looks like they're almost look niter blued. It's a more fragile bluing. I promised people that I would disassemble this. Looking it over, I hate to do that because it is a pretty firearm. One of the other things that I kind of noted in the pictures, just, I wouldn't call these mistakes. I would call them, that's the way they make theirs. That's the way they, this trigger guard undercut, that's the way they machine their trigger guards. Colt made a lot of changes over the years to the way they machine certain things, and Standard does not claim to be copying any one specific generation of Colt. Just these are the combinations that they have put together for what they say is their best single action revolver. One shape I always noted was kind of interesting, was the shape of the very front of the top strap. It's kind of a sharper, more abrupt dip than some of the Colts were more gradual. Been claims by a lot of people that they got USFA's tooling and CAD programs, and Standard has denied that. Just from looking at the firearm itself, I can see why they would. They're certainly not machined exactly the same way as US firearms or Uberti or Colt. Just like the shape of that, slight different. Another area that people commonly critique on a new single action, Colts were really bad about this for a long time. And a lot of people don't know what you're talking about when you talk about the back strap ears and the hammer. But on a good single action that copies roughly single action Army, you like to have the curve of the top portion of the back strap. These are called the ears. You like to have that curve mimic the curve on the hammer, and you like them to come very, very close to mating up. And this is as good as any Colt I've seen, and as good as any of the US firearms. So very good job there. Very good metal fit. Basically just see the change in color from case hardening to blue. there's not a gap or a line or an overhang. You notice the hammer is also color case hardened. That's a nice touch. Colt just blues theirs now on the top and the back and polishes them white on the sides. The spur, the checkering on the spur is very reminiscent to modern third generation Colt. A lot of the gun makers, USFA did this. Uberti's doing it. Their hammers are shaped. The spur is shaped more like the old first generation. I like this checkering. What else can I talk about on this? These are all first impressions. I'm going to have a shooting video. I'm going to get this one out tonight if I can. So my shooting impressions won't be on video. Some people have complained or at least reported that they're shot high left. We'll see. They sight these in a ransom rest, they say, and I see maybe evidence of them actually having sighted this in. Just with my M1 eyeball, front sight looks, I don't know, it's hard to show on camera. Looks like it could be ever so slightly canted to my left from this. Like they turned the barrel ever so slightly, probably regulating the sight. Let's hope that's the case. It's not far off. It's not perfectly vertical, but the way I correct for windage on a firearm is I also turn the barrel. Well, I didn't even work the action in the store. I wanted this to be my initial impressions in real time. So it's a very tight barrel cylinder gap. A little bit of oil closing the gap, so I can't see through it. Other than very at the very top, but it looks like a very tight barrel cylinder gap. No end shake. You can't really see. You can kind of hear a little rotational movement, but you really can't see it. That's very tight. It's tighter than any of the Ubertis I've ever had, any of the Colts I've ever had. I have one rodeo that absolutely has zero rotational movement. I haven't fired it yet, but the other rodeo I have has more play than this. So let's check out the action. Got good timing. Bolts popping up. Looks like, yeah, close to the end of the lead, near the notch, not on the edge of the notch, so doesn't have any danger of actually peening the notch. But that's good. You've got plenty of room for wear on the bolt legs and the hammer cam. As those two wear, the bolt will start popping up sooner and sooner. So this has got plenty of wear built into it. A little bit of hammer over travel, which a lot of people like. As far as, to get a good, it's safe if you have a little bit of hammer over travel. By over travel, I mean it's cocked, but I can still kind of move the hammer a little bit. So let's check the half cock. Now that is perfect timing at half cock. And what I mean by that is, here's a 45 Colt round. I like to be able to, My revolver's at half cock, and I back the cylinder up as far as it'll go because there's some braking pressure on the hand. A lot of times it'll do that anyway. I like to be able to eject it without the case catching it all on the frame, and this one is perfectly timed in that area. Kudos to Standard for doing that. I'm noticing a lot of times Colt and USFA would use assembly numbers on some of their parts. Standard is elected as their assembly number, at least for the loading gate, to use the actual serial number, which is kind of a neat touch. A lot of people think that that's supposed to be the serial number on a Colt, and they get all dismayed when it shows a different number than the serial number, and they have to be informed that that's just an assembly number. But in this case, they actually use the serial number as assembly number. Boy, that is a nice tight fit. It'll wear in a little bit, but look how it is so close of a mating surface. It actually stops briefly. You have to help it home. Some might think of that as a defect. I don't. In fact, it's already closing without any help. Alright, well, let's take the cylinder out, and I'm going to be real careful on this. I don't usually do make a cradle, but I'm going to make a cradle for this one. Alright, back with a little homemade cylinder cradle here. This is just to avoid scratching the cylinder up when you remove it. Like I say, I don't usually worry about that on mine, but this was shipped without a blemish. In fact, they even say that in the documentation that it was provided. I thought it was kind of funny. Neat. Kind of funny all the same. So, don't want to add any scratches on it right now. And they put the serial number on the cylinder. Now this is a fragile blue, this niter blue, but it is pretty. I have to say, that's a pretty touch on something that's supposed to be premium. And it looks like they've done the same thing with the base pin bushing, which is removable. That is some very, very clean machining on that frame. Let's see if we can zoom in some. That is some very, very clean machining. I do like to see that. A lot of times I'll get I've mentioned on some other videos, this section of the recoil shield where the cartridge head is has to be gauged properly so you have the right amount of headspace, but the rest of the recoil shield, you want there to be enough room for the cartridge to be able to go around without dragging. I do not see a transition point. Maybe I can kind of, there's a hint that maybe right in here it starts to get thicker, but there's no line. They've actually done that very, very, very smoothly. That's about the best fitting loading gate I think I've ever seen. Now, one thing that Hickok 45 did not mention in his video, in his review, and I don't know why, but a lot of people like at least the look of the older fixed coned firing pin, and instead of having a firing pin that actually moves a little bit and is scallop shaped, they used a fixed cone. He didn't mention that. One of the challenges when mounting a fixed cone shaped firing pin is that you have to have a larger, this is called a recoil plate. This is on the original ones. I don't know that this is any harder on these. On the original ones, you know, the frame was iron, and they really wanted the plate that the pin came through to be really hard, so it was a hardened separate plate that was staked into place. It's got a larger diameter hole in it than the later models with the scalloped firing pin, and the fit of the firing pin has to be perfect. Pass through that hole properly. One of the complaints I heard from somebody that had, I guess, taken delivery of a T&E model was on his. They hadn't fit that very well. And I have suspected that that was a flaw on all the early ones. And that perhaps one of the reasons it seemed to take a pretty good while for number 54 to get here is that they may have addressed some of these concerns. Perhaps they've worked on the grip some more so they weren't as proud at the front. Don't know. These are not as proud as a lot of the early pictures that I saw, and some of the T&E stuff that I saw. They're not as proud, so maybe they actually went back and addressed some of these. The firing pin looks like it's sitting in the center of the recoil plate. However, there's a very, very slight peening. Doesn't look like it's enough at this point to interfere with anything, but there is a very ever so slight peening right there at the bottom, and that indicates that the body of the cone firing pin at one time struck that during a dry fire. There's plenty of space around it now, and what I noticed was the shape of that cone is sort of tilted up ever so slightly, and it indicates to me that they have possibly, this first batch, they may have gone back and reworked all of them and changed the shape of that cone slightly to avoid contact in that area. That's what I suspect. I don't know if you can sort of see it. It almost looks like it's upturned slightly. I don't think they bent it. I think they've actually reshaped the bottom of that cone to compensate for that and keep it centered as it enters that hole. One way to find out is with some layout fluid, also known as Dicam. I'll let that dry a little bit and see if it's making any contact. The way it looks like it's fitting through the hole, I doubt that it is. I really think they've reworked that. All right, I think it's dried enough. And sheet it all the way. And you'll notice there is no loss of Dicam on the underside of that pin. So that indicates to me that I believe that when this firearm was first assembled, and when the first batch was assembled, I think they were having issues with that. It looks like they have gone back and corrected that, and that may explain why. You know, mine's only in serial number 54. It took 2 months to get here. I think the other ones will start arriving much more quickly. I'd say they've had to go back and rework that. Kudos to them for doing that. The little slight dimple here isn't enough to interfere, and the peen is not gonna continue. So glad to know that. And it's a case of a lot of single actions. You see me pushing this hand back a lot of times on a single action. The hand, if there's no cylinder in, will extend out further into the frame when you put it on full cock, and it doesn't always want to drop back into the frame as easily. So yeah, I just help it right now. Hard to show on camera, but those nice chambers are full of oil, as they should be when you ship a firearm, but look like they're going to be really smooth, and they are. Nice machining on those chambers. The barrel, I'm sure, is also likewise full of oil, but looks like a good bore. Yeah, a little dry grease and stuff in there, oil in there. All right. Here's the part I was dreading. If anything, I like to give everything a good oiling anyway, a good cleaning. But this is this screw has always been free to turn. I mean, this, you can't regulate or qualify this screw head. They're always free to spin. But it's just kind of neat when they were assembling it. For final ship out, they actually took the time to line it up just like they did the grip screw. I really hate to take a screwdriver to any of these screws. If I slip and mar it, at least I'll have on camera what it looked like when it was brand spanking new. Alright, I think I've got the proper screwdrivers assembled so that I don't screw this up. This represents a pretty big investment for me. I had to sell quite a bit of stuff to afford this, so I really don't want to scratch it up. Tight fitting grips. I've never encountered grips this tight. No single action. Well, if these were one-piece grips, we'd take it apart the same way. We just wouldn't be pulling the grips off first, so. Man, this thing's got me scared to put too much pressure on it anywhere. You gotta be able to take your single action apart. But this is like Verity's trained gorillas. That one finally went. Got that one started. These may not have qualified screws when I finish, because I don't know if I'll be able to get them as tightly fastened as they did. Well, I'm not boogering it, but God, that is tight. I'm going to struggle with this off camera for a bit. Alright. Put some coil in there just in case, and reground one of my larger screwdrivers to fit. Has a bigger handle, able to get a little bit more torque on it, and it popped free. I like how these back strap screws are nice and deep into those ears. That was one of the problems Colt really had, gosh, during the during the 80s, particularly some of the ones that they were making during when they were on strike, had all labor issues. They just really over polished those ears. Instead of being nice curves, they were all dished out. Looked awful. Now, I don't know if it matters on qualified screws, but I would imagine it does to make sure I keep these things identified, which screw went where. I got left and I got right. Just taking this off. Well, they're very tightly. At least that'll get under the grips, get them off of the pin that's on the trigger. All right, for ease of disassembly, this sucks, but I can't argue that it's not tightly fit. Pretty nice looking fancy walnut grips there. Pin's in tight. All right, utilizing the, looks like a Wolf spring. I think that's what Wolf uses, the split mainspring, and actually a Colt that I bought in, I think 2010. It was made in, I think, 2009. Also had this split. It's a lighter hammer spring. I'm just kind of looking over the machining. These are, I think Uberti's or entire thing is cast. The trigger guard and the back strap. I think Colt casts the trigger guard now and machines it. They had a time for a while getting the bluing right on them. Sometimes they would turn purple. These are all, every part on this thing has been machined, I guess with the exception of some springs, machined out of 4140 steel. So this was once just a big block of steel that they machined out. Not necessary, but if you're going to build a premium one, it's nice to be able to say that that's how you did it. Time to get nervous again. Good night. Let's work on this one first. There we go. Got that one broken loose. All right. Standard. I admire the tight fit, I really do, but gotta be able to get our guns apart. Doesn't need to be a nerve-wracking affair like this. I'm just afraid to put too much torque. Alright, that one broke free. More clean machining. On a Colt, you'll see a rough surface right along in here where it's been cast first. Oh, come on. There's a bolt screw, trigger screw, got a nice polish on its shaft. That's important for smooth functioning. Keep these mated. There's the bolt. And now the hand and hammer. Let's make the bolt up with its screw. When I lowered the hand from full cock, or hammer from full cock without the cylinder in, and it seemed like it wanted to catch a little bit, that's where this side of the hand here is catching slightly on the edge of the window. I may stone that off actually. Hate to work on a new gun, but I may do a little bit of smoothing on that, as well as the, on a normal action job I'll do, I just make sure there's no burrs, do a little light stoning on the areas that rub. I'll probably do that to this bolt as well. Now this is exciting for me to see. This hammer. We'll set that aside for now. Mark with the serial number. It's kind of neat. One of my criticisms of U.S. firearms was they copied Uberti. They kind of had to when they started making their own parts. They copied the Uberti parts because they were still using a mix of Uberti parts with their guns. They needed to make sure that that transition would go smoothly, because they would have to use some Uberti parts, some of their own parts. Eventually they were all USA made parts, but they were kind of reverse engineered Uberti in terms of shape, which kind of makes it good, because the hand on them is different. The hand on them, excuse me, the hand on a USFA is more like this one, where the Uberti is a little different, but a lot of the internal parts you can, if it were to break on a USFA, you can make a Uberti work. One of my criticisms of USFA was on their hammer cam, they copied Uberti. It was just machined into the hammer. And the original Colts, and Colts to this day I think, use a separate pressed in cam. Nod to the original. It can be harder than the regular hammer. You can use a really hardened pin so that it won't wear out. And looky here, this actually uses a pressed in hammer cam. I like that. You can also see a little line right here, and that's indicating that they have shaved the side of the hammer down maybe, I don't know, a few thousandths of an inch. And that's just so that they can mate the side of the hammer right here really tight in the frame so that there's no wobble back and forth, but the rest of the nice case coloring doesn't get rubbed against the side of the frame. So there'll be plenty of wiggle room there. So that's nice to see. But yeah, as I look over this firing pin, again, I still got some die cam on there. Let's see. All right, I had to remove the die cam from this. I had to be careful. I didn't want to get acetone on my fingers because these have a clear coat over the case hardening to keep it bright and pretty for a while. I can see a slight flat area ground into the bottom of that pin, and I just about swear that that was Standard's way of addressing the issue with the firing pin striking the recoil plate. You can kind of see it almost looks like it's bent up slightly. It's really not. It's just where they've recontoured that. They may have actually removed the pin and made a new pin slightly longer so that they could raise it up on this side. And you can kind of see a little flat area there where they've worked on it and then color case hardened over it. So if I had to guess, that's a correction that they've made to this, which is great. I'm glad they did that. On the USFA, the hammer notches, they always looked a little bit rounded. I'm going to have a comparison video later on. They always look a little bit rounded in the insides, and it looked like it'd do an EDM cut. This doesn't show that. They're actually square bottomed. The purist will like that, I'm sure. But overall, it's a very attractive hammer. Love that checkering on the spur. Very, very nicely done. But glad to see that they corrected that, because I was afraid that'd be a problem, and I was trying to decide if that's a problem, do I send it back? I'd sure hate to have to do that. And kind of resolved that if it was a problem, I was going to try something similar to that, perhaps. So they've just relieved any area of the firing pin that would be striking the recoil plate. Nice job. But I can kind of see it's actually really smooth. I won't have to do any work on that cam. That's nice. I'll just do a little bit of work on the leg of the bolt there, and not necessary really, but I'm just doing it just a little bit smoother. Well, so that is my white knuckle disassembly of a Standard Manufacturing single action. I'm going to give this a good cleaning, a little light stoning on a couple of parts, and reassemble it. This isn't the first and last video on this one. There's, that's funny, very lightly engraved here at the bottom of the frame is also the serial number. I'm guessing that they don't stamp this final serial number till the end, and this just helped them keep it mated to its parts. I will have a shooting video, don't know exactly when. I got to get to the range, and I got a lot of stuff I need to shoot. And I've also got a fellow on the forum that'll help me collaborate. He may send me one of his very recent manufacturer Ubertis in exactly the same configuration, so we can kind of do a compare and contrast. And I've got some Colts, and I've got some rodeos. I'll do one of those videos as well. But I was just kind of excited to get this home, I've always got to strip them down and give them a good cleaning and look at any areas of concern that I might have and correct those if I need to. I know they're selling this as the premium single action and shouldn't need anything, and really doesn't need much. The inside of that frame is very, very cleanly machined, very smooth. Normally I'm taking stones to the inside where there's milling marks you gotta knock the burrs off of. This doesn't have that. Nice clean window for the hand. So this is not going to require much of any work. I'll just address a couple little tiny areas that I like for a little smoother operation and give it a good cleaning and oiling and reassembly. Well, here it is all cleaned up. Managed to get it back together and actually keep the screws rather regulated. So it looks like they're just hard to loosen the first time, so be aware of that. It cleaned up very nicely. It just like a little burr left on the hand that I took off, and has a nice action. It's about like I've got a rodeo in 45, and this is about what the action feels like, a USFA rodeo that I've got in 45. So, and USFAs are known for good actions. They use a regular leaf spring on the back of the hand, so you're never going to get as smooth, as slick, without a lot of gunsmithing, as stuff coming out. Now I can get a Uberti slicker than this because they have the plunger spring arrangement on the back of the hand instead of the leaf spring. I've got a 44 special USFA rodeo that I think has a little bit nicer action. It's a little bit more precise action, I guess I should say. I like it when the hammer just instantly stops and will not move anymore after you finish cocking it. And this one still has a little bit of wiggle room, but a lot of guys actually want a little bit of over travel, just so they know that the sear has fully entered the notch, because without any hammer over travel at all, you know, it may just have partially entered the notch, and they worry about having, you know, push off issues where you could actually push on the back of the hammer because the sear would only be catching a little tiny portion of that. So it's safer that way, really, but this is just personal preference. I think they've done a really good job with these, and I think they'll only get better as time goes on. I appreciate them listening. I really do appreciate Standard listening to some of the very few critiques, and I have to agree with the guy in the Colt forum that actually had one of their T&E examples in his hands for a while. He ultimately didn't end up striking a deal with him as far as doing a review on a publication, but you know, he mentioned a couple things that kind of bugged him, and a couple of things that he thought were issues. I don't remember. The big thing was the fit of the firing pin, and it looks like they've made sure that that's not going to do any damage to the firearm by reworking that. And it does look like they have, whether they were all like this before or not, looks like they've addressed a critique of the grip fitment that some people didn't like. I didn't really mind the proud. Some of the pictures I saw, they were really proud up here where they bump into the frame. I didn't mind that. They've done a good job everywhere else fitting these grips, though. Really nice appearance overall. And I did mention that there was a couple things I thought were kind of neat. Stuff you get in the box. You know, you do have, they did have a card in here. The initials of the guy that test fired it, and it says regulated. So I'm hoping that means that he may have, you know, if the barrel needed turning, he turned it or something to get point of aim, point of impact. We'll see on the range trip how well he did. It's kind of neat. There's a production sign-off card as each guy does his job, and it's kind of neat. It tells you the dates that each little piece of work was done. And it looks like the same guy that shot it and regulated it was the guy that I guess signs off as the final assembly, the guy that says you're done, and then I guess he sends it off to be inspected There's no inspector initials here, but they throw in this card here. I thought it was funny. It's endearing to me, really. So this gun's been thoroughly inspected before packaging in our facility. We guarantee that this gun left her in perfect condition. I don't know if they meant left here or if they're just referring to their factory in their facility in the female terms. You know, like people would about a ship or something. But what they're trying to say with this card is, you know, hey, this thing left us with no blemishes. And so their way of saying, look, if you find scratches and blemishes on this, your gun shop's messed with it. And I have to say, I could not find any blemishes on this upon receipt. And also, I was one that opened it at the shop. They send you this final little certificate of manufacturing excellence. I guess that's the final inspector. So rather than have little inspector notes there on this inspector card, this is, I guess, the final inspection. The guy says, yep, I've inspected it. It's good to go. And the president of the company signs off on it. And I haven't read through the owner's manual yet. I mean, this works just like any Colt. So I'll read through this. Somebody identified something he didn't like about the owner's manual. So I'll let you all know later if they've changed anything or if I didn't quite understand what his critique was, but I guess I will. And then they throw in a catalog for Connecticut shotgun. It's kind of neat. They do have some fine firearms that they produce. But anyway, this is just my initial tabletop review. Hope to have a shooting review soon. I'll also be doing some comparison stuff with Colts, Liberties, and USFA. So hope to see you in the next video, and thanks for watching.